from MHP and Radio Pictures.
My name is Harry Houdini. I have been able to unmask every case of communication from beyond the grave that I have taken on, but not the first one.
What's happening?
Quiet! Santiago Cabrera, Sibongile Malambo, Ian Anthony Dale, and John Goodman.
These people are evil incarnate.
Hindsight, the day before. Coming July 22nd to your favorite podcast app.
Historia Canadiana is recorded on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Historia Canadiana, the show where we talk about just stuff in Canada. And I called it Historia Canadiana, even though I changed it to A Cultural History of Canada. This is going to be an impenetrable reference.
Gotta rebrand, Patrick. What the frickle frackle?
Why did I do this? Why do I do anything? Anyway, my name is Patrick, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Mackenzie.
Yo, 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 yo. What's up?
One more for the road?
Yo.
There we go. So we're back after a month-long hiatus, and mostly because Mac was just elsewhere. He was on a trip. So that's fine.
I was off in Gay Paris. No, I was in rural France. I was in the region of Bretagne.
Okay, that's cool. So, yeah, that's it. So we're coming back, taking it easy, and we're doing another Prime Minister episode. In my notes, in my list of next episodes, I had actually completely forgotten about the Prime Minister that we're going to talk about today. I had skipped him.
A great marker for their standing in the rankings.
Not at all. And look, I don't think he's a bad politician. But I don't think there are reasons why I don't think he's going to rank high in PM status.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about Arthur Meighen, who was an interlude prime minister, right? He was after Borden and cutting up Mackenzie King's tenure, I guess you could call it. So I guess that says a lot. Anyway, before we get started, obviously we like to thank our patrons. Thank you very much for everyone who supports the show, even during these brief hiatuses that we go on sometimes. And yeah, if you want to support the show for $1 or $3 a month, you get ad-free episodes, you get early episodes, and you get the extra episodes of Pop Canada that Mac does. So that's great.
Talk about beavers, baby.
Ever since we've done that episode, Mac has sent me beaver memes, and it's great.
They are my Roman Empire.
I think that's a much healthier Roman Empire to have, to be perfectly honest. My
kingdom for a beaver.
Before we do get started, I do like to highlight also when people leave comments that we appreciate or don't appreciate. So first of all, 2 comments. One, thank you, Elise, for your comments on what we said about Palestine. We agreed to disagree on that one, but again, that's great.
We love the discussion.
Exactly, right? So thank you for sending that. But also, we got on our YouTube channel someone who commented saying that she's a new Canadian, or that they are new Canadian. I don't know why they are a new Canadian, and that they're really thankful for our insights on Canadian literature and culture, and that they wish us more viewerships. So that's
nice.
Great. Thank you very much to that listener. I don't know if you'll listen to this episode soon, but thank you. So let's get started talking about PMs. I pretty much know the answer to this going in, but I assume you've never heard of Arthur Meighen before, 15 minutes ago.
I've heard in passing, but more again in relation to King, you know?
Oh yeah, okay.
In the brief history of learning Canadian politics, I learned, there's William Mackenzie King, and his run was broken up by Prime Minister Arthur Meighen. But King won back anyway. He got back in office.
So this episode is mostly going to be about how Meighen thought that King was a fucking moron and that he thought he was the hottest thing in the House of Commons and no one wanted of him because he was an asshole. Like, he was peak politician material, but no one wanted him in as a prime minister. And that's hilarious to me. So, as usual, we kind of intercut our discussions about prime ministers with a bit of media. In this case, we have often taken caricatures because Meighen wasn't a prime minister that stayed for very long, right? You could take up his whole tenure under less than a year, I think, in total. There's only 2 caricatures that I found that we can like actively discuss, and I will post them in the show notes for people who want to follow along with what those caricatures are. But there's not a lot of them this week. So, Meighen. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I don't see any other way to pronounce his name, but I've never heard it spoken out loud, so I'm just going to go with Meighen until someone tells me otherwise. He was born in Ontario, specifically in Anderson, Ontario. And in what I thought was a very funny line from George Bowering, whom I took a lot of information from, he qualified his parents as so frugal that they didn't even want to give any of their 6 children a middle name. And that's very funny to me, just like being stingy on middle names. So anyway, just wanted to mention that one. So Meighen didn't grow up in a particularly rich household. He did grow up in rural Ontario, and typically that tended to be less, let's say, less well off. There we go. But because he was actually a very intelligent person, right, and young boy, he did manage to get his way into the very well recognized, even at the time, University of Toronto, where, as a lot of people, he would study a variety of subjects, but he was actually by trade a mathematician, which is quite uncommon for prime ministers. I don't think we have a lot of mathematicians or people who studied mathematics, which again solidifies him as a big nerd.
Yeah. Wants their country run by a fucking nerd. Oh, Mr. Prime Minister, we have to launch the fighter jets. Wait, let me work out on my calculator how many jets we should launch. Like, idiot probably got stuffed in lockers in the University of Toronto. You have the kid goddamn atomic wedgie.
I don't know, were atomic wedgies a thing in the early 20th century? Late 19th? Probably. Anyway, kick rocks, idiot, for studying math. So.
Yeah, no, I got in trouble with my mom last time. I'm going to get in trouble with my dad this time because he's a mathematician. He's an actuary. All he does is math.
No, but I mean, I get the logic of why you would go into politics if you're a mathematician. Like, the economy is a huge part of politics, like, and you are calculating risks essentially as a politician. Like, the logic is there. It just isn't a common thing. Most of the politicians that we've had are often lawyers or activists or even doctors, right? Much more often than anything in math. Right? Often because mathematicians don't need to speak, I think, in front of audiences that often. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, you don't have a training like a lawyer does to convince people, right? Unless you want to convince them of a formula. But anyway, he did actually graduate with his class, from his class with honors, actually. So that's really interesting. But, you know, unlike most lawyers who would get a training in debate and so on, most of Meighen's training in debate would have actually just been in debating contests. And guess who was there in those debating contests that he was so popular in and so well spoken in?
Who was there?
None other than his eternal political rival, William Lyon Mackenzie King.
Mackenzie King. Listen, William Lyon Mackenzie King wins because he has 4 names.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but it's a real thing. Like, if you're there and you're speaking, it's like Arthur Meighen, and meanwhile and now his opponent, William Lyon Mackenzie King, and then he finishes on King. Like,
yeah.
he finishes, like, it's stupid, but that's just an actual fact.
Yeah. No, for sure. Like, you start off on a different footing. And I really wish there were records of these debates because apparently they were very, very interesting. Like, both of them were extremely well spoken, obviously, since they would end up as rivals in the House of Commons, right? But they were apparently very well debate. They were very good in debate, right? Each with their own styles. And I would have really been curious to hear what those sounded like as undergraduates. Right?
Can't have that these days.
No, but I mean, there's still debate team.
Not good debates.
No, not good.
They're sound bites. They're canned sound bites. Everybody already knows exactly who the other people and what they're gonna say.
Yep.
Debates don't mean anything these days.
No, because it's all spectacle. It doesn't matter.
Mm.
Anyway, so what was really interesting about Meighen in particular was contrary to King, who really focused on having an outgoing manner and trying to gain attention to himself, being very charismatic, right? Meighen didn't have that. He wasn't necessarily as charismatic, but what he focused on was having a sharp wit and being able to really construct some intelligent arguments in a way that were punchy and impactful. Right. So it's a very different mode of debating, but just as I think relevant as being charismatic. And that's really what he would focus on, right? For his entire political career, he would actually give his audience a lot of credit, right? For being intelligent enough to understand the kind of sharp tongue that he had, which disagree with his politics or not, like that's, I think, a really interesting thing to do. So it was after he graduated in 1896 that he, a couple of years later, would join the Conservatives. Right. So in 1902 specifically, he joined the Conservative Party of Canada, and in 1904 he made his first political speeches in support of a Tory candidate in his area in Portage-Nipawa. It was not a very, like, he was good, but no one was expecting much from this particular candidate. It was like a liberal stronghold. But it did demonstrate Meighen's capabilities to actually try to work up a population through his speeches. And from there, he would kind of keep going up and up in the ranks of the Conservative Party. Right? So what was interesting is that he was mostly operating in liberal country, right? Ontario still to this day is a very liberal part of Canada, right? Maybe less so in rural Ontario, but generally speaking, Ontario is quite liberal on the federal level, I should say. And nevertheless, in the early 20th centuries, he still managed to get hundreds of votes in his little section of Portage. And by the age of 34, he was already headed to Ottawa, which is relatively young for a politician, as evidenced by the components of our House of Commons today. And he would make his first speech in the House, right, of Commons in that same year when he was in his mid-30s. And it's noted that Wilfrid Laurier would comment to, at the time, Borden, who was the head of the Conservative Party, that he had found his successor, right? Like he had just pulled everyone in with his method of speech. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add so far, either about his early life or just a way of going about speech giving. But yeah, anything to add so far, or anything you want to say?
It definitely speaks to its time. I think
Okay.
because the turn of the century and going into the 20th century. Before that, the prime minister would have been picked really based on like merit in the House, campaigning like old school style. We're gonna like this is now when we're really gonna start seeing the new wave of campaigning. Like some of these debates even might have been gone over on the radio in some places.
Yeah, the early days of that, yeah, for sure.
So it
maybe
really,
I don't know.
like,
Yeah,
local probably radio, not the radio because the radio. What is radio? Is a thing anyway. But it still stands. Like we're gonna start to see an explosion of how these people debate. Okay, no. So the radio, 1865.
Yeah, so there would have been radio, but like a national radio would have been a little bit later in Canada. Yeah.
No, but for like again, the affluent radios in their homes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the point being, like, we're about to see this huge jump in communication and how this will set the tone for debates, who becomes the leader of the world, etc. And the fact that both of these men turned out to be so articulate and such good speakers is a credit, honestly, to Canada at this time. Yeah. Because we also have to remember, like, this is a post World War I world.
Yep. Or just on the cusp of World War I. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we're still getting into it now. So watching Arthur raise himself into power now, like he's about to. The fact that he could stand at all is a testament. So yeah, we're making jokes about him as the most forgettable prime minister, but with everything going on around him, it's quite impressive.
Yeah.
The fact that, like, of course he's going to get, if he was in any other time period, he probably would have stood a much better chance, but he just got stuck with, like, the turn of the 20th century, coming off the heels of Laurier, Borden, and now World War I's going to be starting soon, and then the Great Depression's going to hit, like, it's no wonder that this mathematician got swept up in the process.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And it's like, it's not his skills that hindered him. We'll see this a little bit later. It's more his ideas that I don't think, regardless of who was his opponent, like obviously King was a formidable opponent, but regardless of who his opponent was, I don't think people at the time when he was running for prime minister were ready for the more conservative, pull yourself up by the bootstraps type of ideas that he was proposing, right? And so regardless of your abilities as a speechmaker, I think that's what hindered him more, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right that it is a testament to the type of politician that he was. That would kind of be lost with the advent, I think, of television, right? You'd kind of start to see the shift towards the more contemporary politicians that you see. But I'm not going to put the entire blame on television either, because it's a slow process. But yeah, I think you're right with the radio thing.
Just as much on the people more than the tool.
Yeah, for sure. So Meighen would actually become an MP for the first time in 1908 and later in 1913. Robert Borden, who again found him very impressive as a speaker, would appoint him to the role of Solicitor General. Which, do you know what a Solicitor General does? Because I
feel like I've heard it before. I just can't remember right now.
Right. I'm looking it up just very, very quickly because I looked it up and then forgot.
But then, like, the Attorney General is the chief lawyer. The Surgeon General is the chief doctor. So Solicitor General is the chief solicitor. And then as
So
a
basically
solicitor.
the position actually no longer exists.
Hmm.
It stopped existing in 2005, but it was basically designed as an officer to assist the Minister of Justice, right? So
Well,
you're
there you go.
yeah, there you go. Yeah. So that's what he became. And again, this would kind of demonstrate or be the beginning of what would basically become a career for Borden of being a very important figure in Canadian politics that you've never heard of. Because he would, right, like a kind of shadow minister that
Mhm.
influenced a lot of policy. But if you asked the average person on the street, they'd be like, I have no idea who this idiot is.
Basically, like the White House chief of staff.
Yeah, kind of, right? Um, and so he would continue to move around in Borden's government. Obviously, like I said, Solicitor General. He would be Secretary of State. He'd be Minister of the Interior, Minister of Labor. Um, Basically, what happened with Meighen was that whenever Robert Borden needed a hatchet man, he would call on him, right?
Mhm.
Like there was a problem with labor, Meighen, you go deal with it, right? So, for example, one of his most controversial things, and I guess I can talk about it now, um, was his criticism of the Winnipeg general strike, which we've talked about on
Mm.
the show before, right? He'd be very critical of that, and basically would institute the policies that made it illegal for those strikers to be there in the first place, right? And help establish a lot of the rules that removed some voting rights for people who were considered to be agitators, so to speak.
Mhm.
Right? So even if you'd never heard of them, those laws and those regulations and those ideas were very much influential in how the government responded to the Winnipeg strike. Right? Um, and as we'll get to, he would also be very influential in things like conscription or the Wartime Elections Act, that type of thing. Um, but yeah, so what I was, where was I in my notes? Um, yeah, so this is, yeah, I guess we could talk about our first, uh, caricature, right? Which is linked in the notes. I don't know if you saw it,
Yeah, I got them.
Mac. Okay, the first link, the one where he's handing a soldier. Did you see that one?
Is this the full market value one or the I ready?
The I ready one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you see on that one?
It is. So I guess that's Meighen. And he's
Yes.
going, I ready we are. And he's handing over the Canadian soldier to the devilish hands of imperialism.
Right.
It should be noted that the imperialism isn't French.
Yes. What does that tell us, Mac?
Well, that means it's probably talking about conscription,
Yes.
which was a very controversial amongst the Francophone population, always was. In fact, it led to, I think it was one of the largest riots in all of North America's history, was the conscription riots of Quebec.
That would, I think the ones in the First World War were the bigger ones, I think. Yeah. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Either way, just to go to show, Canada cannot do conscription. Canada will never get away with conscription again, simply because of the fact that, like the next World War would quite literally have to be on our country for conscription to work.
Yeah, I don't think there's like a huge support from the Canadian population on that one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, absolutely. So, again, in keeping with the idea that Meighen, was more of a hatchet man for Borden, for this particular idea of the wartime necessities, right? Like the Wartime Elections Act, which limited who could vote, or drumming up efforts to support conscription, right? Basically, that was Meighen's job, right? To go to different MPs in the House and try to convince them, whether liberal or conservative, or at the time there was the Union Party, which was huge, to support conscription in the House and support these policies that that the Borden government was trying to put forward, right? And so again, even if he wasn't necessarily the face of these acts, right, he was very much the person working behind the scenes saying, we have to do this. Yeah.
And here's the honest truth. The common population of voters are idiots. And so it's no, but it's true. And this changes things. This very, very much changes things. And so we're very much now, the important people you need to win over are the people you don't see, because they can then influence the rest of the people. Again, we're living in a new time of technology, and more voters could be persuaded and switched over through mass media.
Yeah.
Newspaper articles, editorials, op-eds, anything you wanted. Yeah. So it didn't matter that nobody knew who Meighen was. The only people that knew who he was were the only ones that mattered.
Yeah. Do you feel that's fair to say that the majority of voters are idiots, or is it just that the information that is, especially at the time, available to them is limited to the point where they cannot make,
like, they're really informed, malleable. And that's a consequence. Like, humanity as a species is pretty adaptable to the circumstances around us, and part of that means that we have to be very malleable. So therefore, it's really easy for people to shift our opinions around.
That's true. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So on top of these particular bills, he would also be tasked with rousing support against let me start that again, because I'm dead tired and that sentence did not go well. So he also drummed up support for a bill that allowed financing for the Canadian Northern Railroad, right? So on top of being someone who was known, kind of anti-Quebec in some ways, with the conscription bill, but he would also gain support as a lover of big business, right? So,
oh yeah, I can see how that one's gonna go over.
So, just checking all the conservative boxes on that one. Like, again, man of his time. Of course, although that's not necessarily limited to his time, but he's doing all you'd expect from a conservative politician of this particular moment. And handing over loads of cash to big businesses that don't necessarily need it, especially in a time of war, is hilarious. So, as one commentator I read put it, Borden was basically the one who was occupied with broader imperial matters, right? Canada internationally, whereas Meighen became the most influential domestic minister, which I think is a really good way of putting it. So, like I said, he was also the one that would be vehemently against the Winnipeg general strike. And there's a really great quote from him, which I pulled and demonstrates just how far his conservatism goes, but also I keep talking about how good of a speaker he is, and now I actually have an example of the type of words that he used, in this case to talk about the Winnipeg strikers. And he writes, notwithstanding any doubt I have as to the technical legality of the arrests and the detention at Stony Mountain, I feel that rapid deportation is the best course now that the arrests are made, and later we can consider ratification. So very clear, but very acerbic type of speaker. And basically, for people who didn't catch that, he's saying, I don't care if it was legal or not to arrest strikers, but now that we did arrest them, wouldn't be a bad idea to deport them. right? Because
We
fuck
love
them, I
to
guess,
hear
for
it.
wanting. Why would they want better rights? Bunch of idiots. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps like a normal person, like I did.
Hmm. It's
Yeah.
oh boy, it's again, it's part of the this now. This is the larger problem with being the guy behind the curtain all the time. Is
Mm-hmm.
eventually you do have to win over the malleable masses,
Yep.
which is part of the problem. So you
Mm-hmm.
like it's fine at the start to come out for all the big wigs, but that only works for so long.
Yeah.
And then you actually
Exactly.
do have to mold the opinion of the masses. I can see
Mm-hmm.
why he would get the prime minister election because Bourdain has basically positioned him as his successor with all the
Yeah.
interior stuff he was taking care of. But
Exactly.
the man was too smart for his own good and didn't know how to run the numbers on people.
Exactly. And it is interesting because, again, thinking about Canada internationally versus Canada domestically, right? He would make a lot of comparisons with the Winnipeg General Strike and what was happening, as we talked about, in Russia at the same time, which was the
Mhm.
revolution, right? The Bolshevik Revolution was happening at that very moment, although by 1919 they were more in civil war than revolution, but regardless,
Yeah.
right? That was happening, right? And he would make a lot of parallels with the strikers in Winnipeg to the Bolshevik, well, what he perceived as the Bolshevik threat in Soviet Russia, right? And so a lot of this conflation between what was happening over there, and he was saying, well, we sent troops, right, in Russia. The Canadians sent troops to help the White Russians, right,
Mhm.
against the Bolsheviks. And that wasn't successful, but we can try doing that here. And it's like, well, the strikers were never to the extent of a full-on revolution. They just wanted better rights, right? And that idea of not being aware of what the population actually wants, I think, is a very salient point on your end.
Mhm.
And I wanted to just demonstrate that through that example. Yeah. Um, so, like you said, he would succeed Borden, right? Borden, after the war, decided to retire in 1920, and technically the Conservatives still had a majority of the House. So what happens? Well, in this case, the head of the Conservative Party became Arthur Meighen, right? Who would basically complete the conservative tenure until 1921. Right? So that's how he became prime minister the first time. Right? Is purely not through elections, not through anything like that. He just inherited the role. Right? Classic conservative behavior in this case.
Mhm.
Um, and he would kind of start off on a wrong foot. In 1920, he pulled one cartoon, right, called A Mean Trick, right? And that's the other one that we have over here. I don't know if you saw that other cartoon.
Ah, yes. The other one. Hold on. The Meighen trick full market value wheat board.
Do you know what that is, or what that is referencing, or what you can gather from it? Because it's not like the most like
It looks
clear
like
one if you don't
basically
know.
Arthur Meighen played with he played with the farmers and he
Mm-hmm.
basically used them to try and launch some sort of attack for the speculators based on the economy, but then left the wheat farmers out lurching in the wind with high production costs.
Basically, yeah. So what happens
I'm
during a
intelligent.
war?
I have critical thinking.
Yay! But it goes to show just how clear like cartoons can be and how indicative a
Mm.
lot of them can be. But and basically what happened is that in wartime you need food.
Yeah,
And what do we have a lot of here in Canada? Wheat. We're one of the biggest exporters of wheat in the world, for those of you who don't know.
we're one of the
Um,
biggest exporters in general of natural resources. It's
yes,
wild.
that too. But obviously it's very difficult for farmers, especially before there's like mass industrialization, to actually keep up with war production, right? And often what accompanies
Supply
war
and demand.
is supply and demand, right? So it's very difficult for a lot of farmers to do that, and often what accompanies war, and we'll see this again in World War II, is high inflation, right? Because people want to eat, there's lack of sources, lack of food, it kind of spirals out of control. Right? So in order to avoid any kind of problems with the wheat farmers, what the Borden government had done was institute a price freeze, right? Basically ensure a certain amount of money to the wheat farmers and say, we'll cap off at this much, it'll avoid inflation. Which for small farming producers is great, right? Especially during the war, especially at the time, right? And Meighen comes in swinging, and he's like, "No, do you know what's good? Free market capitalism, baby.
Oh,
the war is
God.
over.
Don't even.
The war is over. It's time to get back to business." And so he removes these tariffs. And a lot of, obviously, farmers were not super happy with this. Not that they couldn't keep up, right? They wouldn't like be able to maintain production and all of that, but it's a very sudden move to do after years of controls, right? And the inflationary problems that had plagued Canada were not entirely over. And so to suddenly just open those floodgates made it very difficult for farmers to kind of adapt so suddenly. So not a lot of farmers in the West were happy with Meighen on that one to remove stability from their mouths, which plagues farmers to this very day. But hey, that's
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, this is, yeah. We're going to see.
Go
This
ahead.
is why his tenure as prime minister is so short.
Yeah, exactly. Because so far he's managed to alienate Quebec. And
which
now,
you can't win an election without.
Right. And now the West.
Yeah. Well, yeah, big part of the election out there.
Yeah. So what's left is British Columbia, Ontario, and the Maritimes.
And then
So-
the Maritimes are probably going to drop him pretty quickly because they can probably put 2 + 2 together as far as this wheat thing goes. And they can see the same thing happening to fish, which, kind of important for the Maritimes.
Yep.
British Columbia is going to do the same thing because if he's screwing over the people that are already slightly west, the far west is next. And that leaves only Ontario.
Yep. So not great. But that was like the major thing that he did as far as like policy during his time, because a lot of the other stuff that he would do is kind of predicated on the aftermath of the war, right? Or kind of bringing Canada out of the war and into the 20th century.
We love the war.
Capital W war. What?
Viney, baby, Viney Ridge.
But he's related to Vimy Ridge, because
God.
one of the things that he would do is actually give the speech that inaugurated the statue that is there at Vimy Ridge commemorating the Canadian soldiers, right? So he would actually be explicitly tied to that. And I have the quote here, unless you want to read it, but it's a great quote.
Here, in the heart of Europe, we meet to unveil a memorial to our country's dead. In earth which has resounded to the drums and tramplings of many conquests, they rest in the quiet of God's acre with the brave of all the world. At death they sheathe in their hearts the sword of devotion, and now from oft-stricken fields they hold aloft its cross of sacrifice, mutely beckoning those who would share their immortality. And many hundreds of plots throughout these hills and valleys, all the way from Flanders to Picardy, lie 50,000 of our dead. Above them are being planted the maples of Canada, in the thought that her sons will rest the bettering shade of trees they knew so well in life. Across the leagues of the Atlantic, the heartstrings of our Canadian nation will reach through all time to these graves in France. We shall never let pass away the spirit bequeathed to us by those who fell. Their names liveth forevermore.
King shit.
No, king shit comes later.
But like, it is a genuinely good speech, right?
It is. No, and again,
yeah.
The man's proven that his problem isn't his speaking ability, his wit, etc. It's the fact that, and I'm sure even his policies in a theoretical sense weren't bad. Like the numbers probably made sense and added up. But you can't look at it that way. You forget a very human element if that's all you do.
Exactly.
That's the issue.
Right. Yeah. And kind of speaking to that idea of not necessarily respecting the where the world seems to be going to, right?
Mm-hmm.
He would very much be one of those people that pushed back against Canada being a fully independent nation, right? He, at an imperial conference in Britain, yes, big Anglophile, right? He still saw Britain as, Mother Britain. Just
mwah, mwah, mwah. He loved the taste of that British ass.
Oh yeah, huge bootlicker as far as Britain's concerned, absolutely. And so he would very much try to continue those relations with Great Britain, right? Much more than he would, for example, with the United States, right? Against whom he would put a lot of protectionist tariffs against. So that very much influenced, again, Canada, even though he didn't really stay that long as a prime minister, but those protectionist tariffs would, change the economy in serious ways.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, all good things must come to an end. And he called his first post-war election in December of 1921. And he basically ran on a platform of no nonsense. It's like, I'm calling it as it is. Let me give you your medicine, right? You may not like it, public of Canada, but this is for your own good, and I'm gonna speech your ear off about it in a very poetic Shakespearean way. And boy, did no one care.
He got boxed. He got absolutely trounced. He got flummoxed. He was smacked around like the Hulk with Loki.
Like his billboard was basically, like, his speech was basically just him, like huge pictures of him with a very simple slogan saying Canada needs Meighen. And he often ended up producing speeches that insulted his voters without knowing that he was doing so, but it sounded pretty, so a lot of people were like, yay, I guess. Are you saying it's good or bad? I don't know. Yeah, it was a bit of a weird election campaign. Not gonna lie.
Again, it's predicting what is to come. We've had some very weird election campaigns these past couple of years.
Yes, absolutely. But again, like that wheat thing would come back to haunt him, because what was happening in the West and you saw it through by-elections, for example, was more and more progressive governments. There was actually a progressive party that was forming, right? And or you would have what was called the Social Credit Party in Alberta, right, which is more of a populist right-wing party, right?
Canada isn't Britain anymore.
Yeah.
Like, when Canada first got its independence in 1867, 100% we need to talk about our relationship with Britain. But we're running now in a post-World War I world. The old power of Europe is basically gone. It was all decimated in the World War. You're left with the power of the up-and-coming communist Russia, which, big yikes for me on that one, friend, comrade. And then there's that funny little guy in Germany who's starting to do some things, but again, big yikes. And then you're left with the U.S. That's more who your relationship's with. And if you're going to push back against the U.S., you can't be, yes, England, the birthplace of civilization, like Meighen literally said. You have to be, hey, we are our own place that can stand up to America. We are our own country with our own values.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And like to add on to that, in 1920, up until the election campaign, there was a huge depression in Canada, especially for that affected businesses. And
Yeah,
when
we
your
call that
message
winter.
is, yeah, and when your message is pull
Seasonal
yourself,
depression, baby. It's like a truck.
that's a very good one. And when your message to economic depression is pull yourself up by your bootstraps and embrace British traditions, people are going to systematically tell you to get bent.
Well, it's also like that statement is so fucking like it's half American, half British, zero Canadian.
Yeah, exactly.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. His free market economic policy is like basically America copy and pasted.
Yes.
And then he's also
Hmm.
saying, "Love Britannia, God save the Queen." And you're left like, if I
Yes.
was Canadian, I would go, okay, what about any of this is Canadian?
Yes. What about the people you're purporting to protect, right? And want to actually help, right? And that's why a lot of the
All Mackenzie King has to do is walk up to the podium and go, man, what about those beavers?
right? And already at the time, like his policies were very outdated. Like people were running parallels between his policies and the national policy that MacDonald had ran on 50 years prior,
Oh no,
right?
you don't
Like
have the charisma to be McDonald.
that's clearly what he wants to be. And he just doesn't have it, right? Because again, he's not aware of what certain certain material realities need, right? The farmers needed more control and better resources of their land, right? And the progressive parties and liberal parties of Canada, love or hate them today, offered that to them at the time, right?
Mm.
Or at least rhetorically offered that, wanted to represent them. Quebec was trying to identify more and more as its own identity within Canada or separate from Canada for some people. And Meighen just didn't have that. He didn't care about that. Right. And so it just didn't work for anyone at this point. Um, and so yeah, he got trounced.
If you're the guy in the shadows for so long, you're never gonna learn what it is to be the guy up front. And that's the
Yes,
problem. He
exactly.
had like we said, he had all like he knew how to run a country, sure, and he had the support of everybody in the back rooms.
Yep.
But there is still part of it where you have to learn how to be somebody who can like shake hands and kiss babies, you know?
Yes,
I
exactly.
can picture William Lyon Mackenzie King kissing babies, not Arthur Meighen.
Very much not. And so the Conservatives won a whopping 50 seats, third
Woo!
to the Progressives, who won 65, and the Liberals, who won 117 seats.
And so
Um,
begins Canada's long run towards moderate governments.
just halfway mark governments.
All the time for the rest of our lives.
Just
It began with
absolutely
Mackenzie King and
middle of the
will be
road.
cemented by our Lord and Savior, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Long may he reign.
All hail Pierre Trudeau.
All hail the moderate republic.
Just a nothing state. um,
All
so
hail the mediocrity.
so
It has
I'm
nice
not
hair,
gonna. That's very good. I'm not gonna. We're not gonna talk about Mackenzie King's tenure because we're basically
just
going to
yet.
be covering that next week, next episode.
In our
So
three-parter.
hold your courses. Yeah, exactly.
We're gonna have one episode
Um,
for each of its 10 years.
oh my god. um, but basically the second time that Meighen gained government, he did even less than what he did in his first government.
Yeah, because he was there for even less. He was there for like a couple months.
Not even. I think he was there.
He was there for 6
Yeah, he was
months,
there.
July to December.
Exactly. Yeah, end of June.
Oh no, June to September. God, sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. June, July, August, 4 months.
And he was, once again, he wasn't even voted in. It's because, as we'll talk about next week, King went through a bit of a scandal. It was called the Bing King scandal. Terrible name for a scandal. No one cares.
Bing King, baby.
Bing was the governor general at the time. That's why they get the name there.
At least have a fun name like Lewinsky, you know?
Right? Like something catchy, not Bing. Although
Monica
it gives us
Lewinsky
Bing King.
Scandal.
So basically, after that brief scandal, the governor general was like, look, I'm disbanding the liberal government and handing the reins of power over to someone
that
who...
guy.
Yeah, that guy. Someone who knows what he's doing, obviously, as evidenced by his glorious first term in 1921.
But then we're going to have real elections.
Yeah, so basically he did very little in power. A lot of the time, he mostly just ended up debating liberals and it going nowhere because the conservatives still didn't have the majority of the House. So it was just kind of a dead end over what they could actually accomplish, politically speaking. Yeah.
Get wrecked, idiot.
So basically, he called an election like 2 weeks after he arrived in power once again, and basically ran on a very similar campaign as he had in 1921. And in December, yeah, exactly. I don't think they used the same slogan, but whatever. He was defeated in December, again, just trounced. No one wanted him, even despite the scandal. They were like, King's the man. It's fine. The King is literally in his title, in his name. It's fine. Just give it to him. And basically, Meighen would be so disillusioned by the public's lack of faith in him and call them all idiots and resign from the head of the Conservative Party. So he basically threw a hissy fit at the end of his...
Nice. We love to see the leader of our country throwing hissy fits.
Exactly. He would actually have... Yeah, exactly. He would be appointed to the Senate in 1932. And he did briefly come back to conservative leadership in 1942. No, sorry, it was in 1942. Yeah, in 1942, he lost in a by-election. So yeah, he would have been called back to leadership a little bit before that during the Second World War. And yeah, he just stopped after 1942 when he lost his by-election. But I want to kind of end here with a quote from a political commentator at the time and writer called Eugene Forsey, who is a very respected political commentator in Canadian politics, and I'm trying to find the quote here. And he wrote of Meighen, never a note, never a repetition, every name, every date, every quotation, impeccable. Never at a loss, invincible with interrupters and hecklers, never ruled out of order. The speeches were masterpieces, alike in manner, structure, and matter, classical in their flawless English and memorable in their phrasing. And for that reason alone, he was respected as a politician. Mm-hmm. So which is why he was respected as a senator when he did that. But ultimately, no one wanted him as a PM. I don't know if you have anything
Always
to
a bridesmaid, never a bride.
Yep, there you go. I don't know if you have anything to add on him before we rank him, but that's Arthur Meighen. Obviously, we made jokes about him, but I think,
I
yeah,
think
go ahead.
that actually sums it up very well in the fact of like, as a politician, he probably would rank fairly high just because of his
Exactly.
accomplishments. But as a prime minister, he's probably below the four nobodies. Like he reigned as long as he was in office as long as they were essentially. Like
Yeah.
And he loses even more points for the fact he never got elected.
He loses points for the fact that he wanted it. The other four at least didn't want it. They were just forced there because MacDonald had died and the party was in shambles. They were like, who's next? This idiot.
Yeah. Like I put him at the
Meighen
bottom.
actually wanted it.
He wanted it and lost twice, and both times he got in, he wasn't elected.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's as
As an
simple as
important
that.
politician, truly probably like great significance to Canada. As a prime minister, he's a loser. He's exactly what he is. He's a mathematical nerd getting shoved into lockers.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of mean, but pretty much.
It's mean. Is it mean?
Heyo, let's go, ladies and gentlemen. So are we ranking them just based on their prime ministership, though? Or are we ranking them as overall prime? Okay.
I think we have to, because that's like, it's the prime minister ranking. You know, you have to win the seat to qualify. Yeah,
and you kind of have to. It may be arbitrary, but you kind of have to make the cutoff somewhere, right? So yes, I agree. So are we putting him dead last at number 9?
I believe so.
Wow.
Again,
kick rocks, idiot.
He's the wrong man in the wrong time.
Yeah.
Like wrong man, wrong place, wrong time. Again, if he had been in an earlier competition where media wasn't starting to be so massively consumed, he might have had a better chance.
Yeah.
Like if he had been around at the time as the Four Stooges, I think he actually would have had a decent chance of like taking over the party in the wake of MacDonald's death.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But he was just too young at that point.
No, he wasn't even. Well, I guess he was born.
He was born, but yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, if he was born in that time, I think he actually would have stood a very good chance of becoming, like, probably a well-known prime minister because of the necessity of all, and he would have been able to carry on MacDonald's legacy of the national policy like he wanted.
Mm-hmm. Which made sense at the time. It didn't make sense in the early 20th century.
No. Yeah. Again, like, bad place, bad time for him. He's coming off of a post-World War I political landscape, post-World War I economy. He's going into the roaring 20s, and he has no idea what he's doing.
Yeah.
It makes sense that, like, you need a different type of politician at that point. You need a charismatic face. You need a person that's more Wilfrid Laurier, more John A. Macdonald, who has the kind of je ne sais quoi to them that can carry a nation. Which we're going to see next time in, like, top, like, literally probably the next best contender for the number 1 spot since Laurier. Yeah. Well, Laurier wasn't too long ago. Laurier was only 2 prime ministers ago, but
easily contender for top 3. Like, I'll put him somewhere in there.
For top 3. He's on the podium. Yep. You just got to figure out if he's first, second, or third.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I can go with that. Of course,
what's his name?
William Lyon Mackenzie King.
Damn straight. The longest serving Canadian Prime Minister non-consecutively.
Yeah, what an absolute legend. I can't wait to talk about how he talked to his dead mom. That's great.
Fucking love it. The man saw us through World War II. Woohoo!
And he talked to skulls and his dogs.
Let's go.
Anyway.
Take us away, Patrick.
Okay, I'm taking us away. Okay. So thank you everyone for listening to this unhinged episode of Historia Canadiana. And next week, probably more Unhinged. If you want to support us, once again, you can check out our Patreon. Thank you for all your comments that you leave. They're great. We love them. And yeah, probably soon we'll be releasing another episode of Pop Canada. So check out the Patreon for that. And yeah, leave a review, leave all that good stuff. We check them out. I read them. It's great. Right. So yeah, share the show with your friends.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Thanks. Cheers, everyone. Mac, you have to say bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Was that so hard?
Yes.
A podiatrist will tell you about your feet. An orthopedist will tell you about your bones. A physical therapist will analyze your gait. A psychologist will help you manage your anxiety. But what if they're all connected? What if your walk affects your hip alignment and the loss of movement affects your mental health? At Kaiser Permanente, we know the body is connected in unseen ways. That's why our doctors work together to care for all that is you. Kaiser Permanente, for all that is you. Learn more at kp.org.